Meanwhile, within the gloom of the dungeon, Chrome confronts a mysterious beast. His successful slaying of the creature earns him 36 points, added to his account by the system. He dedicated the day to purging the dungeon of the lingering monsters in an effort to elevate his level, but to no avail. The status window mockingly displayed level 25 out of a potential 50. The monster population within the dungeon dwindled, for no new ones emerged. Upon the demise of the dungeon boss, eager adventurers will swarm the dungeon within days, seeking valuable resources from the carcasses of the slain monsters. Chrome realized there was no longer any benefit to remaining within the hollow dungeon. He had exhausted his efforts, ransacking every nook and cranny for creatures to defeat in hopes of leveling up before reintegrating into the village. However, his current level, despite his intensive dungeon clearance to augment his mana for reincarnation, proved insufficient for entry into Lame City. His true objective lay in returning to the heart of the kingdom, the capital city, Karma. Despite the bustle of the crowd, he knew he'd stick out like a sore thumb. In the seclusion of the underworld, his sharp fangs and extensive facial bruises could be veiled within the shadows. Such a trick, however, would be futile within the heart of the capital. So, where could Chrome seek refuge? A memory suddenly flashed within Chrome's mind. His friend Ash had once vehemently declared he wouldn't set foot in Otfield even if his life depended on it. Ash refused to venture there despite the allure of promised riches, for the place was synonymous with death. Perplexed, Chrome, still disguised, asked why Otfield held such a dire reputation among its residents. The reaction he received was pure incredulity. Did Chrome truly not understand the horrors that besieged the city? After a horrific monster attack, Otfield had morphed into a desolate ghost town. In the wake of rampant monster invasions, looting, widespread chaos, and rampant murder, the city was indifferent to individual plights. No sane person would willingly venture into this decaying metropolis. Chrome pondered on this memory, realizing that the lawlessness rampant in Otfield might serve as the perfect cover for his unique circumstances. His plan was to use his power of reincarnation to transform into a human, and then wear a hooded cloak during the day to conceal his fangs and his unnaturally pale skin. These safety precautions seemed more than sufficient. Upon reaching Otfield, Chrome could check into a hotel and seclude himself within its confines, recuperating his mana to maintain his human form. Moreover, Chrome had managed to gather several monster remains that could fetch a good price in Otfield, providing him with enough resources for food and shelter. All in all, Chrome was convinced his plan was nothing short of brilliant. Emerging from the shadows of the dungeon, the man steps into the light of the sun. His destination, the town of Otfield. The scene that meets his eyes paints a picture of desolation and destruction, as if a hurricane had rampaged through the streets. Cracked walls, fragments of stone and splintered wooden beams lie strewn at the foot of the buildings. This man, Chrome, once a mimic, now walks among these ruins, ruminating aloud on the fallen city. Otfield had become a refuge for society's misfits and outcasts in the wake of monster attacks from the dungeon. As Chrome recalls, dark whispers taint its reputation as the most dangerous city in their country. Yet life persists here, as Chrome observes, and not just among hardened criminals. Despite its ominous reputation, Chrome feels a sense of satisfaction in this melancholic place. Thanks to his transformation, he walks among people now, unjudged, unfeared. Yet he remains vigilant. His first order of business, acquiring clothes. And he must remember to curb his enthusiastic smiles. His fangs might draw unwanted attention. For now, Chrome can maintain his human guise for approximately 6 hours before reverting back to his monstrous form, concealed behind a mask. He needs to secure a low-cost inn where he can safely recover his mana overnight. But first on his agenda, Chrome decides, is to visit the local guild headquarters. As he nears the guild, he prepares his offering, 3 red monster stones, each from creatures surpassing level 20, and lays them out on the counter. A guildsman scrutinizes the bounty laid before him, skepticism etched into his face as he queries how such a seemingly frail and delicate individual could amass such a collection. At first glance, the young man, known as Chrome, is far from imposing. His physique is slender, lacking any discernible muscle. His equipment isn't anything to write home about either. Chrome chuckles, a touch of awkwardness in his laugh, and humbly credits his impressive haul to his exceptional skill. The stones Chrome has brought are coveted gargoyle eyes, obtained from the menacing western dungeon. Their sale could garner him sufficient funds to comfortably subsist in the city for a significant amount of time. The guildsman's weighty hand deposits a disappointing sum of 500 gold pieces onto the table. Chrome's eyes widen in disbelief. This is a far cry from the reward he had anticipated. The guildsman surely jests. Such precious ingredients would fetch a price tenfold in the capital, accompanied by profuse gratitude. Eventually, the guildsman suggests that Chrome should take his bounty to the capital instead. With that suggestion, the man reignites Chrome's simmering frustration, reminding him that they are not in the affluent capital, but instead stuck in a remote, forlorn place known as Otfield. Perhaps the stones were illicitly acquired, he insinuates. How was he, a simple guild employee, supposed to discern? The guildsman clarifies that they do not investigate the level and rank of adventurers at this guild outpost. Furthermore, they don't concern themselves with how a person came into possession of such items, be it through lawful means or otherwise. Even if Chrome were to saunter in here drenched in blood, not a soul would bat an eye or dare to question him. If the mimic finds anything unsatisfactory, let it fall apart on all ends, and seek out a buyer who'll pay more and ask fewer pointed questions. Chrome resolves to depart with 500 coins, but this doesn't signify his defeat. He was merely swindled. This money, at best, would last for 3 days, or in the worst-case scenario, even less. Furthermore, the mimic isn't familiar with the local customs, inhibiting his ability to trade. Chrome's path is obstructed by a towering blonde man who instantly pegs him as a greenhorn. Upon being questioned about his intentions, the man introduces himself as Jeff, a local adventurer so well known that even the town rats would recognize him. He informs Chrome that newcomers here are fodder for the vultures, so it would be in his best interest to familiarize himself with the local regulations post-haste. Chrome had never encountered any such rules in Otfield. He ponders whether Jeff is trustworthy. The adventurer abruptly seizes Chrome by the frail fabric of his black tunic, pinning him against the wall to assert his dominance. Chrome hadn't anticipated such a reception within mere minutes of his arrival in the city. Jeff demands payment for the stones, which he assumes Chrome stole, promising to watch his back in Otfield in return. Chrome is incensed at this blatant audacity. An audacious adventurer appears, determined to coerce him. In this unfamiliar locale, who else might be lurking in the shadows? Grasping his wrist and asserting his independence, Chrome retorts that he doesn't require any form of external protection. Jeff counters, stating that such a frail figure will barely survive a day in the perilous Otfield. But Mimic cuts him off mid-sentence. With a swift and firm shove, Mimic displaces his adversary, causing him to tumble to the ground as unceremoniously as a potato falling from an overfilled sack. A stunned Jeff queries the audacity of the act. Comrades behind the adventurer immediately start to chide him, their idol Jeff, for his inability to handle a seeming bag of bones. It seems as though he's lost his footing on the unyielding asphalt. In the meantime, Chrome coolly evaluates Jeff's prowess. Assuming his judgment is accurate, Jeff is around a level 20. In a burst of energy, the man regains his stance from the asphalt, proclaiming that Chrome will now pay for his insolence. From his scabbard, he brandishes a gleaming silver sword. Chrome is taken aback. Is he seriously going to strike him, a man armed with a gun, in broad daylight, in full view of a crowd of bystanders? The audacity defies all logic. Even Jeff's compatriots implore him to calm his temper. It's evident the situation is ill-suited for combat, yet Jeff seems deaf to their pleas. Enraged by Chrome's audacious maneuver, he vows to instruct the young man in a lesson of respect. In that fateful moment, our protagonist musters his courage to intervene. He charges towards Jeff and his entourage, skillfully disarming the adventurer with a swift kick to his sword's hilt. As Jeff watches his weapon skid across the ground, his anger towards the youth deepens. Sensing an impending escalation, the boy knows it's time to make a swift exit. A hollow threat echoes behind him, Jeff swearing to end his life on their next encounter, declaring no force could shield him. Seeking refuge in a nearby alley, the boy known as Chrome reflects. He could have easily dispatched Jeff, but his mana, as vital to his existence as oxygen is for reincarnation, would have been squandered. Furthermore, such a display would swiftly reveal his mimic nature. It appears that coexisting with humans will be significantly more challenging than his life in the dungeon he recently escaped. Later, within the confines of a modest room paid for with his limited funds, Chrome assumes the form of a monster and collapses onto the bed. He acknowledges that even the underworld hadn't drained him this much. Ultimately, Chrome manages to secure a budget-friendly hotel room, a sword, and a cloak, though all of it seemed to carry the faint echo of previous ownership. As per the system, the rusty dagger was a stolen item, sold and then bought by Chrome himself for a total of 240 gold coins. The worn-out robe, also stolen, had cost the mimic 60 coins. The hotel room, the most basic one available, was rented for 110 gold. Its simplicity was not a concern for Chrome, who only sought a sanctuary to replenish his dwindling mana overnight. As he sits on the edge of the bed, head bowed in exhaustion, he longs for more time among humans. All he's ever known are the monsters lurking in the dungeon. However, his immediate goal is to gather information about this city before descending back into the underworld to continue his quest. Gifted with a unique ability that consumes just a trickle of mana, Chrome found solace among the people, spending time in their companionship. In the hallowed halls of the church, the Sacred Father queried Shelley about the substantial sum she had donated, questioning its true worth. He harbored worries about the young girl squandering such a large amount on her own whims. With a tender smile, Schultz cradled a young child in her arms, reassuring the Sacred Father that there was no cause for concern. The intrepid adventurer, she proclaimed, would certainly accrue an even larger fortune upon her return to the capital. Despite their gratitude towards Shelley for her generous donation, the Holy Father expressed his sorrow that she had expended so much. He suggested that Schultz should view this city as a regretful memory, one best forgotten. Surprised, Shelley sought to understand the elder's statement. She affirmed her indelible bond with the city, a place forever etched into her memory by a monstrous attack, a place where she was raised within this very church. Among her are children whom she affectionately calls her siblings, whose care she assumes. A young boy, curious and hopeful, inquires whether she is a famed adventurer in the capital. Schultz, with a hint of pride, confirms that indeed his sister is a celebrated adventurer. The boy, in his innocence, then questions whether the capital would provide aid to handle the aftermath of the calamity. Shelley hesitates momentarily, then, brimming with confidence, reassures him that they will indeed overcome the disaster. Bidding farewell to the Holy Father, she entreats him to look after himself. He returns her sentiments, reminding her that her path is fraught with perils far greater than his. Chrome had always found it difficult to communicate. Every time he attempted to strike up a conversation, people regarded him as if he were the world's biggest fool. He considered the idea of gathering more monster stones to sell in the capital, where he could potentially earn a hefty profit. Yet, this plan was swiftly dismissed. It was simply too risky. The capital was heavily guarded, and just reaching it would cost Chrome a fortune. The alleys of Otfield were teeming with poverty-stricken individuals, yet they blended seamlessly into the cityscape. Unfazed, Chrome wandered amongst them, barely aware of their presence. He realized that he would be apprehended swiftly in the capital if he aroused suspicion. In Otfield, however, he could stroll freely. Everyone was odd in their own way. Additionally, venturing towards the country's heart, Chrome risked bumping into old faces he'd rather avoid. Like Ash, who still remembered their deadly encounter in the dungeon. Earning substantial wealth in Otfield was also unlikely, but this didn't bother Chrome. As he was lost in his thoughts, he failed to notice Mimic. Instead, he was greeted by Shelley, who instantly recognized him as their savior. Near the capital, Chrome stood still, his expression unreadable. "Look, it's the same boy!" Schultz exclaimed. Chrome opened his mouth to speak but was interrupted. What was Shelley doing in such a forsaken place? Her face was radiant with joy at this unexpected reunion. "Do you remember me?" she asked excitedly, not waiting for his reply before continuing. "We met in a cave. You bravely rescued me and my comrades from the Gargoyle King. I never expected to see you so soon." Chrome didn't voice his thoughts, but internally he was thinking that he hadn't exactly planned to see her again either. If Mimic's memory served him correctly, her name was Shelley Schultz. Within the troop of adventurers led by Frank Guido, Schultz was, to Chrome's recollection, the least experienced, resting at the rather humble level 18. Yet a question tugged persistently at his mind. Why was she even here? These folks hardly seemed like menacing outlaws, but rather like wanderers from the capital. But for what purpose? Chrome knew that his silent brooding would draw more suspicion than his previous, unsuccessful attempts to blend in. Determined to evade discovery this time, he braced himself to flee. Shelley, eager to learn his name that he'd conveniently never shared, approached. Chrome, claiming a case of mistaken identity, spun on his heel and bolted, leaving Shelley standing, her eyes wide with surprise. As she chased after him, Shelley recalled Frank's words, his suspicion that Chrome might be an escaped convict. Perhaps Frank had been onto something. This theory could explain the man's mysterious presence in Otfield. Yet, Schultz found it hard to digest. Her inherent kindness wouldn't allow it. Even so, she wasn't interested in probing into Chrome's past. While pursuing Chrome, she called out, just wanting to express her gratitude for his heroics in saving her life. Nothing more, nothing less. Chrome, however, seemed deaf to her words. Did she know his true identity, he wondered, his circumstances growing increasingly precarious? Schultz halted in the middle of the road, gasping for breath. She had lost sight of the enigmatic man, despite her swift pace. Surprisingly, he had outmatched her, an accomplished adventurer. A challenging decision awaited Shelley at this juncture. Uncertain, Chrome stood at the crossroads. Which path had he taken? Trapped in a cul-de-sac, he was at a disadvantage. However, a glimmer of hope existed. Shelley was nowhere to be seen, buying him time. But he knew it was only a matter of time before she would catch up. Left with no choice, Chrome decided to use the Mimic's claws as a makeshift escape route. He pressed himself against the very wall he'd sought refuge against, his long claws digging into the cold surface. He began to ascend, inch by inch. His freedom was in sight, his hand reaching out for the top of the barrier when disaster struck. His treasured sword clattered onto the asphalt below. He wasn't ready to abandon it. He'd exchanged 240 gold pieces for the weapon, a sum not simply found scattered on the streets. Torn between his escape and the sword, he chose the latter. Chrome launched himself from the wall, chasing after his fallen weapon. The landing, however, was far from gentle. Wincing, he rubbed his lower back, berating himself for the reckless leap. Who in their right mind would jump from such a height? In his distraction, Chrome hadn't noticed Shelley's arrival. She loomed over him, a shocked expression painting her features as she inquired about his daring jump. The gravity of his situation dawned on the Mimic when Chrome admitted the height of his leap, sending a cold sweat trickling down his back. He was in deep water indeed. Managing to regain his footing, he found Shelley offering apologies, her eyes filled with concern. She'd chased him, unintentionally spooking him. Yet, it was clear from her remorse that this was far from her intentions. The man implores her not to harbor such delusions about him. After all, he'd initially tried to evade her. Apparently, Chrome had overheard her vowing not to pry into his past, and now he brings up her earlier declaration. With a casual air, Schultz confirms this. She genuinely doesn't care about his past misdeeds. To her, what truly matters is his recent heroics, saving her and their comrades. Chrome, standing in the gloomy western dungeon, observed Schultz with a hint of skepticism. He'd been fearful of encountering those from his past, who might view him as a monstrous creature rather than the man they once knew. Yet here was Schultz, the sole person in Otfield willing to interact with him, overlooking his troubled past. Her kindness towards him was a stark contrast to the indifferent attitudes of the other Otfield residents. For the third time, Shelley inquires about his name. The persistent questioning leaves him slightly disconcerted, but he responds, "My name is Chrome Clank." Upon hearing his response, Shelley claps her hands in delight, exclaiming that his name is incredibly beautiful. Internally, he hopes that revealing his true identity, rather than an alias, will not result in future regrets. Finally, Chrome decides to reciprocate. "Your name is Shelley, isn't it?" Unable to hold back his curiosity, he asks her what she's doing in this desolate city. However, noticing her subtly uncomfortable reaction to his question, he immediately apologizes. He admits that he'd acted thoughtlessly in posing the question. After all, it was none of his business. He reassures her that she doesn't need to respond if she doesn't want to. Schultz's smile assures that all is well. He insists that there's no cause for concern. As he turns to leave, he mentions that he actually resides in the capital, visiting Otfield only to see relatives connected to the church. This city is the birthplace of Shelley, a detail that stirs fond memories in him. Shelley, recalling her yearly family visits, bears witness to the city's gradual descent into danger. It reminds her of Frank's remark about her hometown being overwhelmed by monsters, a memory that summons images of a dungeon brimming with creatures. This revelation enlightens Chrome, helping him understand why Otfield has turned into a sanctuary for criminals. It's a bitter pill to swallow, but it's a puzzle piece that fits. Chrome concedes this is his first time in Otfield, expressing curiosity about its past safety conditions. Shelley decides it's time to delve into the glory days of Otfield. While it never rivaled the grandeur of the kingdom's capital, the city once brimmed with life, its inhabitants cherishing it with unwavering love. However, the good times were marred by the looming shadow of a nearby dungeon, where a burgeoning monster population stirred fear in the hearts of the townsfolk.